Welcome to this episode of Hebrew the Living Word. I am Dr. Charles Liu. Like a fine jeweler who examines a beautiful diamond, in this series of teaching, I'm going to help you to see the multi-dimensional aspects of a Hebrew word. And this is the third episode in the Declaring the End from the Beginning series. What we are about to uncover in this episode might be quite shocking to you. We are continuing on our path to take a deeper look at Prophet Isaiah's claim, declaring the end from the beginning. And today's study is all about how mankind begins. Because if one misunderstood how we begin, then the end will also be unclear to him or her. So we will start our exploration from the very beginning of the Bible. As a matter of fact, we'll start from the very first word in the Bible, in Genesis chapter 1, verse 1, which is the word Bereshit. It's spelled with 6 Hebrew letters, Bet, Resh, Aleph, Shin, Yud, Tav. First, let me make a shocking statement here. Do you know that the first word in the Bible has been mistranslated? Not only in English, but many languages across the world. Whenever someone is translating from one language to another, the translator often reinterprets the verse according to his or her understanding, not necessarily exactly following what the text says. And this is indeed what happened when we come to the word Bereshit. As mentioned before, this word is almost exclusively being translated as in the beginning. But throughout the centuries, almost all the translators have unconsciously added an article the into the word which is not in the original text. In order for the article the to appear, the Hebrew letter he needs to be inserted into the word. So it becomes Be-Hareshit, but it is simply not there. And the first occurrence of this he is actually in the fifth word, Hashamayim. And it is being properly translated as the heaven. But there's also a mistranslation here as well. It should be translated as the heavens, plural, because the suffix yim in Hebrew is a plural noun. Now I provide a page from the Hebrew English Interlinear ESV of the Old Testament, which is a literal word-by-word translation of the Hebrew text, without any padded idea from the so-called translators. And the text clearly shows the added the is not in the first word Bereshit, and the missing plural noun for heavens. But since we're only going to deal with the first word here, so you ask, what is the difference in the meaning of the word with or without the article the? Shall we say an earth-changing difference? With article the being added into the word Bereshit, it makes it sound like in the beginning versus what the ESV version suggests, in beginning. Or we can even paraphrase like in a beginning, which is what Bereshit actually means. Because with the extra additional article the, it intentionally set the readers on their path to think that this is the beginning of all things, the grand beginning of all beginnings, where without it, it simply means only one of the beginnings. In other words, this inserted meaning of an article the by the translators has caused centuries of misunderstanding of this first word in the Bible. Let me also show you from a Jewish angle. A famous medieval Jewish sage, Rabbi Rashi, commented on the interpretation of this word. He says, whenever the word Reshit occurs in Scripture, it is in what we call a construct state. For example, from Jeremiah 26 verse 1, in the beginning of, or Bereshit, the reign of Jehoiakim. And also in Genesis chapter 10 verse 10, the beginning of Reshit, his kingdom. Here we talk about the kingdom of Nimrod. And also in Deuteronomy chapter 18 verse 4, where this time the word Reshit is being translated as the first fruit. So the phrase says the first fruit or the Reshit of thy corn. What Rashi points out is a very important grammar rule. He teaches that the word Reshit or Bereshit is in what we call in grammar a construct state, and its meaning is always derived from the adjacent word or phrase by connected with the article of. And let me help you to understand what a construct state means in English. It is like if we say the phrase colors of, but without adding the next word to the phrase, then the color is colorless. But if I added the word rainbow to it, then rainbow gives the meaning to the noun color, and the meaning of the phrase colors of rainbow becomes complete. And there are many examples in the Bible where this word Bereshit appears. Many times it appeared in the exact same format as Genesis 1 verse 1. The translators were able to properly translate those incidents as a construct state by adding the preposition of into the phrase. Now here's a good example. In Jeremiah 26 verse 1, we have the phrase, in the beginning of Bereshit, the reign of Jehoiakim, which is the exact same word as Genesis 1:1, Bereshit. Notice how much easier and clear to interpret this phrase as in the beginning of. No one will say that Jehoiakim begins his reign from the grand beginning of all beginnings. Rather, it's being understood that the text says in the beginning of the reign of Jehoiakim. And let me take you on a rabbit trail a bit here. Do you know that this first word, Bereshit or Reshit, has another meaning which means to inherit? Now, every Hebrew word has what I call a parent root word. In other words, Hebrew words are being birthed into existence from this parent word. And this parent word carries what I call an action meaning that relates directly to the child word. In our case, the parent word is the word Rosh, spelled with two Hebrew letters, Resh and Shem. You can see that this word is nested in the middle of Bereshit. And counted from the right, the second and the fourth letter. And the action meaning for Rosh, it means to inherit. So using our previous example, in the beginning of the reign of Jehoiakim, Bible is literally telling us the beginning of the inheritance of the reign of Jehoiakim. Because when Jehoiakim sits on the throne which he inherited from his predecessor, in this case, his younger brother, Jehoahaz, who was disposed by Pharaoh Necho in 609 BC. We can cite another example. And this is the second time that this word Bereshit appeared in the Bible. And the verse is talking about Nimrod. And here's the verse from Genesis chapter 10, verse 10. The beginning, or Reshit, of his kingdom, Nimrod, was Babel, and Erech, and Akkad, and Calneh in the land of Shinar. Here, the same idea is presented as before. And this verse is about the beginning of the inheritance or the kingdom which Nimrod inherited from his father Cush. Finally, we find a similar usage of this parent word Rosh in Genesis chapter 15 verse 7, where the Lord was telling Abraham of his future inheritance. And the verse says, and he said unto him, I am the Lord that brought thee out of Ur of Chaldees, to give thee this land to inherit, or Yarash. My question is, how can anyone to inherit something if what he or she inherited is nothing, or formless and void? Therefore, that is our first clue that something was there to be inherited. As we go on, it will be more clear to you as to what I mean by this. And the second word we're about to examine is the second word in the Bible, which is Bara, Bet Resh Aleph, and is usually translated as created. Now there's nothing wrong with this translation. As a matter of fact, the translators have embellished the meaning, or one can say they have glorified the meaning to mean more than what the word says. Now, one of the modern theory which developed from this meaning of create is that Yehovah created out of nothing. And the theory is called creatio ex nihilo, or just ex nihilo, which is a Latin term means to create out of nothing. This concept is sometimes claimed to be present in a 2nd century BC Jewish work called 2nd Maccabees, or in the 1st century AD Jewish philosopher Philo of Alexandria, but it seems to have originated around 200 AD in disputes between Christians, Gnostics, and Neoplatonists. And by the 3rd century, creatio ex nihilo had become a fundamental tenet of Christian theology, which is still being taught in universities and seminaries worldwide. Now, one of the Jewish sages, Nachmanides, translated the Hebrew word Bara as creatio ex nihilo in the 1st verse of Genesis. And this is how the Judaism has always translated creation as is rooted in Jewish mysticism, which also had a worldwide impact. And today, Jews, like the Christians, tend to believe in creatio ex nihilo, although some Jewish scholars recognize that Genesis 1 verse 1 acknowledges the pre-existence of matter to which Yehovah gives form. First, let us deal with the actual meaning of the word bara, bet resh aleph. I have to admit that create can be included as one of the meaning, but there are other words which also be included as a potential candidate. Here's a list from the Strong's Concordance: to create, or creator, to choose, to make, to cut down, to dispatch, to be done, and make fat. Do you see the last word on the list, make fat? And this is the meaning when this verb bara is being used. It's what I call a hithil form. It's a causative active verb, meaning something or someone has done an action to this verb bara, and that someone is Yehovah. And our question is, what did he do? He basically enlarged the heavens and the earth, or fattened the heavens and the earth. In order to clarify this, we need to look at the parent root word again, which is a 2-letter word, bar, bet resh, which means grain, corn, or wheat. And the actual meaning of this word bar means to feed. We have an example from Genesis 41 verse 49, where Joseph is storing up the grain as feed for the Egyptians. The verse says, "Thus Joseph stored up grain in great abundance, like the sand of the sea, until he stopped measuring it, for it was beyond measure." Now listen to the root word for store up, which is the word zavar, zadek bet resh, and the word grain, bar. We have zavar versus bar. Here is an example of what we call a word pond, to show the relationship between the two words. So I advocate that the earth was filled up or enlarged by feeding herself during this initial time period. And this is also what the hithil form of this verb, make fat, really means. Can we find evidence of this? Of course. Look at the following verses on how Yehovah filled up the earth and the heavens. So from Genesis chapter 1, we have with the following verses: "Let the earth sprout vegetations, plants, yielding seed, and fruit trees on the earth, bearing fruit after their kind, with seed in them. And it was so. And the earth brought forth vegetation, plants yielding seed after their kind, and trees bearing fruit with seed in them after their kind. And God saw that it was good. Let the waters teem with swarms of living creatures, and let birds fly above the earth in the open expanse of the heavens." And later, in verse 27, God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him. Male and female, he created them. And God blessed them. And God said to them, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. So we can see that Yehovah filled up the empty spaces, or tohu vabohu, teeming with lives from trees, vegetables, fishes, birds, flying creatures, as well as humans on earth. And this is to fill the earth. And that is what the word Bara actually means. From what we just discussed, the meaning of this verb Bara is more closely linked to the idea of feeding to fill than create out of nothing. The first idea describes that Yehovah fed and filled a pre-existing heavens and earth. However, the second idea argues for the creatio ex nihilo, which Yehovah created out of nothing. Now, these two ideas are not in harmony to each other. There is no doubt in my mind that Yehovah is very capable of create out of nothing. My only argument is, did he do that at Genesis chapter 1 verse 1? And we'll find out. There are also a number of other incidents where Yehovah did not create out of nothing. Questions. Did Yehovah create Adam out of nothing? And what about Eve? And the answer to both questions is no. Yehovah uses the Adamah, which is the dust of the earth, to create Adam. And he used Adam's rib to create Eve, citing an incident in the New Testament. Even Yeshua created eyes for a blind man from the same material, Adamah. And this is from John chapter 9, verse 11. With these thoughts in mind, let me make a second shocking claim here. Do you know that the earth has had a pre-Genesis 1:1 existence? In order to validate this, we will examine some very important words from the first two verses in the Bible, because this also ties in with the actual age of the earth, which we'll discuss a bit later. But there is another important word we need to examine from verse 2, which says, the earth was formless and void, and darkness was over the surface of the deep, and the Spirit of God was moving over the surface of the waters. Now we will only concentrate on one word, and the word is hayeta, from the phrase, the earth was, or the haaretz hayeta. Do you know there is another mistranslation here by the translator? In order to properly translate this phrase, it should have been translated as, and the earth she was. In case you didn't know, earth or haaretz is a feminine noun, and her masculine counterpart is heavens or shamayim. The translator, however, have cleverly taken out the word she from the complete meaning of the word, because they cannot entertain the idea that earth can mean a personal pronoun, she, or a feminine third-person singular personal pronoun. We are not going to detail here, only a brief mention, because the real important word here is the word was, which is a to-be verb, hayeta. It is actually the understanding or the misunderstanding of this four-letter Hebrew word, which has caused centuries worth of debate between the scientists and the evangelical communities. They agree to disagree on the age of the earth based upon this interpretation of this one verb, hayeta. Here's how we solve this problem. It is easily discerned from the text itself if one reads it properly. The word hayeta, hey, yo, tav, hey, is what we call a to-be verb. In English, it has three forms: was, am, and will be. So one can say, I am home, or I was home, or I will be home, to show the difference in tenses. However, in Hebrew, there are only two tenses: perfect, which means a completed action, or imperfect, which means an incomplete action. Therefore, this word, hayeta, is what we call a third-person feminine singular perfect verb. In other words, hayeta means an already completed action or a completed event prior to the composition of this phrase, sort of like the past perfect tense in English. So if one is to properly translate this word hayeta according to the correct Hebrew grammar, it should be translated as she had existed, instead of just the word was, which is only a past tense. Stop, take a breather. What I just said, that the earth, she had existed in formless and void, or tohu vavohu, prior to Genesis chapter 1 verse 1. I'm not really advocating departing from the traditional translation of the verse, and the earth was formless and void. I'm only telling you what the word hayeta would have meant to a Hebrew reader who knows the biblical grammar. What I am pointing out is that Moses penned these words with precision. There is no mistake in what he wrote. What is in question is the way how we've traditionally interpreted this word without going into the depth of the meaning. Let me borrow a phrase from the movie Fiddler on the Roof. Tradition, tradition. Traditionally speaking, we have given the translators the red carpet treatment, not knowing that we are taking in their personal view on the word, and sometimes not necessarily what the text actually says. On the other hand, the traditional view of creatio ex nihilo would have been acceptable if it weren't for a bunch of troublemakers keep popping up all over the world. And who are these guys? They call themselves the dinosaurs. And what was the problem they created? Their bones. So that we have a bone to pick with the dinosaurs. Along the same line, another set of questions rises to the surface. One, were Adam and Eve lived with the dinosaurs in the garden? And two, did Noah bring the dinosaurs up into the ark? Now these troubling questions are not easily answered. So back to the problem of the age of the earth. So, concerning the age of the earth, the Christian theologians and historians alike have carefully constructed the history of mankind based upon the age of patriarchs from Adam all the way down to today, and they also based upon the theory of creatio ex nihilo to be about 6,000 years old. But if one is to inquire the actual date of the Earth's age from a modern archaeologist who is digging up dinosaur bones all over the planet Earth, he or she recognizes the scientific fact that these fossils have been laying underneath the earth for millions of years. Because of the layers of sediment, they are piling up on top of these bones are much more than a few thousand years old. As a matter of fact, they've concluded that the earth is millions of years old. A young earth theory is just not acceptable to them. So, who is correct? My shocking answer to you is, both are correct. The earth existed in a chaos state long before Genesis chapter 1 verse 1. And Yehovah, Bara, or filled up the earth from about 6,000 years ago. There is another point regarding the words tohu vavohu, which means formless and void. Now, do you think that the all-wise Yehovah begins his creation by building something that is formless and void? Very hard to explain this, wouldn't you say? But the Hebrew text actually is telling us that the earth has had her prior existence in a formless and void state. This phrase, formless and void, or tohu vabohu, is repeated by the prophet Jeremiah. He uses this phrase in Jeremiah chapter 4 verse 23 to describe an impending judgment from Yehovah. And here's the verse. I look on the earth, and behold, it was formless and void, or tohu vabohu, and to the heavens, and they had no light. So what are this verse is telling us? Now remember the word tavnit. It's a word in Hebrew for pattern concerning events in the Bible. What Jeremiah described is a pattern, or tavnit, to what happened to the earth prior to Genesis chapter 1 verse 1, parallels to the judgment done to the nation of Israel. The earth, she was judged by Yehovah, and the earth existed for millions of years in a state of chaos, or tohu vabohu. And the earth was severely punished because she has become an enemy of God, just like the nation of Israel has become a prodigal son. And the phrase tohu vabohu actually points to another word, tehum, which tells us that the earth was drowned in a pre-Genesis flood, similar to the Noah's flood. But we won't go into detail here. But what happened after Genesis chapter 1, verse 1? It was a makeover event for the planet to make her fruitful or beautiful again. And this makeover event can be seen from the second word in the Bible, Bara. In this sense, it means a transformation into something beautiful. By the way, if you look up the Strong's Concordance, you will see that this word transformation is listed among its biblical usage. In the same manner, the nation of Israel will also be transformed sometime in the not-too-distant future to be a nation that is after God's own heart. I hope that you are enlightened by this study to realize that the prophet's words declaring the end from the beginning is indeed true. Currently, the earth is on her way of being punished and literally defaced again, but she will be transformed and emerge as a new earth. And quoting from 2 Peter chapter 3, verse 13, which says, "But according to his promise, we are looking for new heavens and a new earth, in which righteousness dwells." May the grace of Lord Yeshua HaMashiach, the love of Jehovah, and the fellowship of Ruach HaKodesh be with you all. I will see you in the next episode of Hebrew, the Living Word. Shalom Aleichem.